Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear listeners, Assalamu Alaikum. A very good evening and welcome back to Friday Night Fusion, the new sound of Great Britain, broadcasting live and interactive on 93.5 FM, Unity FM across Birmingham and surrounding areas, both nationally and internationally on www.unityfm.net. Now, in light of the Citizen Khan controversy that we've had here in the UK, here in Birmingham specifically, many of you got in touch a few weeks ago to talk about this. An item that was supposed to last half an hour lasted 1.5 hours. So that shows you how much you, the listeners, had to say. But when it comes to the portrayal of Muslims in the media, what exactly are we looking at? Are we looking at a positive portrayal? Is it positive, the work that Muslims that are involved in the media are currently doing at present, not just here in the UK, but also on an international level? Now, my guest for this part of the program is somebody that's done a lot of positive work through the vehicle of media. Zarqa Nawaz is an internationally acclaimed writer, broadcast journalist, a screenplay writer and filmmaker, and she joins me on the line from Canada. Zarqa Nawaz, Assalamu Alaikum. Thank you very much for joining us on Friday Night Fusion today.
Oh, alaikum salam. Thanks for having me on.
First and foremost, looking at your biography, it seems that your initial aspiration as a youngster was to get into the world of medicine. What inspired you to choose the world of media instead?
Well, not getting into medical school probably helped a lot. So after I wasn't able to get into medical school, I was looking for a career that I could do. And I remember at that time there was a lot of interest in Muslims going into journalism because there was concern that, nobody was doing that, and we were always picking sciences as careers. And, it always seemed like journalism and filmmaking were the sort of sexy, forbidden careers that our parents never talked about or encouraged us to do. But once I didn't get into medical school, I thought, well, why don't I give this a try? And I did apply to journalism school, and I got in. And from there, I realized that I had sort of this ability, this kind of latent creative ability that I didn't know about until I was able to practice it, and started practicing journalism, and then slowly got into filmmaking after that.
A lot of people may ask that as a Muslim woman going into the world of broadcast journalism, going into the big wide world of media, what exactly did you expect to see? Did you expect to be a part of developing perhaps pieces that were aimed at more the mainstream, or did you actually set out in the world of journalism to try and portray a positive image of Muslims in your own community?
I was trying to do both because I wanted to, do mainstream stories that had nothing to do with Islam and Muslims, and I also wanted to, deal with the Muslim community. And, my first documentary was called Me in the Mosque, and it was just about the whole issue of women and how women are treated in mosques, the whole issue of separation and segregation. And, this is, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in Canada we have, in the US we have big issues with, some men feeling that women shouldn't be seen or heard or should be put in, substandard conditions in the mosque. And so I did a documentary examining sort of the hadith of the Prophet and how, he had the women pray in the same area without barriers or curtains or, 2 floors or behind glass, the way women are now treated in mosques. And it was, again, it's against the Sunnah, the way women are treated these days in the mosque. And so I wanted to talk about that and get the Muslim community to talk about why we've gone above and beyond, these issues of separation and segregation and to the detriment of the female element in the community. So I did a documentary called Me in the Mosque, and from there I was inspired to come up with a television series because I thought, what if the imam, because in Canada at least the imams are always from overseas and they come from cultures that are much more conservative than the indigenous Muslim cultures, and this always causes problems for the youth and particularly for the women.
Absolutely.
And I wondered what it would be like if the imam was from the same culture, was Canadian and born and raised in Canada, and was very much pro-women and wanted to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet and make sure it was a very safe and inclusive place for women. And that's where the idea came from for Little Mosque on the Prairie.
challenging cultural conservatism is a very commendable thing to do. However, what was the response from the community there in Canada and around the world when you came out with this TV series? I know it had a lot of popular demand. It was actually broadcast many months, I believe, before it was supposed to be broadcast. But was it welcomed by both Muslims and non-Muslims alike?
I think for the Muslims at first they were taken aback because, you know, as a Muslim community, we're not a very sophisticated community when it comes to media, and this was the first television show that portrayed, you know, the mosque and the Muslim community. And, you know, we didn't start off slowly with sort of like the Cosby Show with a couch in a living room. We started off with a mosque and then made it into a comedy. So I think for the Muslim community at first they were really surprised and worried that it was going to be a show that was going to, you know, insult Islam or put Islam in a negative light. So they were worried, you know, quite worried at first, and there was a lot of conversation and hand-wringing, and, you know, the blogosphere was lighting up. And it took a good year before people calmed down and realized that it was just a show that was exploring the Muslim community in a different way, and that it wasn't set, you know, I didn't create it to insult anyone, that I was someone that belonged to the Muslim community and the mosque community. Particularly the mosque meant a lot to me in my personal life, and that's why I was, you know, exploring these areas.
Right.
So it did take a while. I mean, now that the show has finished its run, six season run, Muslims are like, oh my God, it was the only show I ever watched. I miss it so much. You know, I wish it was back on. And I remember, you know, that those were not the sentiments that I had heard when it first came on.
Sure. So people have very much become used to it, have begun to accept it over time. I don't know whether you are aware, I'm sure you've read various pieces in the press about a television series that started up here in the UK on BBC One, in fact, entitled Citizen Khan, that has caused a lot of controversy, set on a Muslim community leader in Sparkbrook, Spark Hill area here in Birmingham, quite a prominent area for the Muslim community. And this has sparked off a lot of controversy because a lot of people have argued that this takes the mick out of Muslims. The problems do exist in our communities, in the Pakistani community and other communities, but it's not for the BBC or organisations like it to wave our dirty laundry in public. What position do you think the mainstream media have when it comes to addressing these sorts of issues? Is it wrong for people like yourselves and the creators of programs such as Citizen Khan to be talking about issues that one community faces in public?
No, I mean, that's the same criticism that I got with Little Mosque on the Prairie, because I did very much talk about women and how they were treated in the community, and especially in the mosque. You know, the sexism and the racism and the extremism. And the Muslim community had the same reaction, right? Like, I shouldn't be washing our dirty laundry in public. And my answer to them is, you know what? They already know we have these issues. Like, for us to pretend that these issues don't exist is like patently ridiculous, because they, you know, non-Muslims have a far worse opinion about us than anything that the show could ever explain. If anything, the show can put it in context and say, well, you know, this is why these things are happening. This is what the community is doing to combat these issues. Some of these issues are similar to the issues that you have in your own community. A lot of these issues are universal. And so I think the Muslim community seems to be under this impression that if we, you know, dig our heads in the sand, people will think we're this perfect community without any problems, which is not true, because people don't think about that already. What they would like is some sort of context and some sort of, you know, acknowledgement that we know these problems are existing. This is what we're doing about solving them, and you know, and then to make it balanced, because I made sure that, you know, I had non-Muslim characters who also had similar problems, and it would go back and forth, and so you would have this sort of well-rounded community that would show issues from both angles, you know, from the non-Muslim world and in the Muslim world. So I think the Muslim community, you know, has issues with exposure. They feel that if people realize that these problems exist, which they already know that these issues exist, that somehow our reputation will get worse. And the thing is, our reputation is already there. It was there a long time ago. If anything, it helps our reputation get better because we're being honest about our problems.
Yes, and I suppose people would add in saying that there's various other programs, I'm sure you have the same in Canada as we have in the UK, where other communities and their problems are highlighted. For example, EastEnders, the very popular soap here in the UK, talks about problems of certain elements of the white working class community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't understand why Muslims feel that they need to be shown in some sort of glowing artificial light, and as a community that doesn't even exist,
Yes.
Because we're not that community. We are an ordinary community, has the same problems everyone else does. I don't know. I think Muslims seem to feel that if we show this false, non-existent front, it will help, combat Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. And my attitude is, no, it won't. People will just say that's not real. This is propaganda, and we're not going to watch it. And then those shows won't survive in the ratings because people don't want to watch a false front. And it would be boring and uninteresting, and it would disappear.
So actually, do you think that by these programs being put into the mainstream media, does it make Muslims like you and I more approachable, especially after 9/11 and 7/7, of course, acts that all Muslims strongly condemn? There has been this sense of this argument that perhaps a lot of non-Muslims feel quite hesitant to approach a sister who's wearing a hijab or a brother with a big beard.
Yeah, I mean, I had American men tell me that after they watched the little mosque on the prairie, they could not feel the same way about a Muslim again because the show made them laugh, and it gave that bearded man humanity, and that they now felt that they could relate to that person in a different way than they could before. It took away sort of that fear and that mystery, that antagonism, and that what the show did was give them an ability to relate to that person, and it bridged a lot of gaps between the two communities. And that was the greatest compliment that I had ever heard, because I had never thought that a show could do something like that. And I think that's what Muslims have to realize, is that, we have to stop thinking that propaganda is what will bridge the gaps between the two communities. And it's what we need is the truth, sometimes the unvarnished truth and honesty. And comedy helps a lot in terms of creating sort of a universal language that we can relate to in terms of our communities. And, that's indeed what happened with Little Mosque on the Prairie.
Sure. Now, obviously, when we talk about the portrayal of Muslims and the role of Muslims in the media, we're not just talking about programs that are out there to promote a better image of Islam and Muslims, but also commendable individuals like yourself that have very much become extremely successful in the world of media, and somebody that young people out there can look up to as a source of inspiration. When you found yourself working upon a lot of mainstream content, I know you were behind a lot of very successful radio shows and TV shows in Canada. What role and what importance do you think that level of experience in your life had to play for you as a person, and also for inspiring the community as a whole?
I think it's just important for Muslims to be working in every sphere out there, and particularly the ones in which we tend to shy away from, which is like media, television, radio, and, becoming playwrights, making films, becoming poets, columnists, editorial, advice columnists. I mean, I just finished a 6-month stint as an advice columnist for a national newspaper here in Canada. And, these were non-Muslims asking me questions about their lives and their issues, their relationship issues. And, they weren't Muslim, and there were all sorts of questions that, Muslims would find very odd and different, and yet I had to answer them. They were like gay people asking questions about their, issues. And, I had to answer it as a humanist, as someone who could, take my values and yet still apply them to, people who weren't Muslim in a way that they could relate to and help make their lives better. And that was important to be able to do, because you have to be able to make yourself useful to everyone, not just Muslims, in every way. Otherwise, you have nothing to contribute to society, and you really, you're just going to ghettoize yourself into this tiny little box, of a tiny segment of the Muslim community, and utterly be useless to the world. And then that's not, I don't think that's what God wanted us to do, is to be isolated and no use to anyone. And I think it's very important for Muslims to realize that we have to go out into the world and use our talents and abilities to be good and to make the world a better place, not just for Muslims but for everybody. And that's that's part of our faith, and is to go out there and makes the world a better place. And I think that's important for Muslims to realize. A lot of times we become very, isolated and think that, we are only meant to be part of the Muslim community and not beyond that. And we can't, and I think unfortunately we have these sort of blinders on, and we just become very narrow-minded in our vision when it comes to what, careers to choose, and even within our careers what to do.
A lot of people out there, particularly Muslims, who feel as though the mass media has negatively targeted and demonized Muslims, may want to go out and make a difference, may want to become a part of the great world of journalism, may want to use community stations like Unity FM to do so. However, they worry about the challenges and barriers they may face. Did you find in your experience as a Muslim woman wanting to explore this path? Obviously you have been immensely successful on an international level, but did you find that actually at the start in particular, were there many challenges and barriers put in your way?
No, not really. I mean, if anything, I would say being Muslim helped a lot, in terms of people wanting to understand the religion and the culture. And then my attitude about, being open-minded and not being an isolationist helped a lot. So I think the two came together really well. And that, I remember I asked the network executive who greenlit Little Mosque on the Prairie why he chose that show. And he said, because it was in the zeitgeist. Everyone's always talking about it. Everyone's always worried about it. Everyone's always asking questions about it, and then here you came with this idea that could bridge the gaps, that could tell stories about the community in a really funny way, that could talk about the immigrant experience, that could talk about, the universal, relatable stories in a way that could answer all our questions. And it was sort of the perfect combination of the two issues. How do we answer questions? And then you come along with, stories about your community that were funny and comedic and relatable, and then it was perfect. And that's why the ratings were so high. It was because it was at a time when people were asking all these questions about this community, and they wanted answers, and they found these answers in this medium that had never been attempted before, and it was original and different. And so it was, if anything, people were very happy to have someone like me answer questions like that for them in that format. So I've never felt that my religion held me back, or that I had to, compromise my values. I just feel like I've always been able to do things on my terms, and as alhamdulillah, as a result, it's always been successful.
Alhamdulillah. Now, when you look back on all the media work that you have done over the years, including Little Mosque on the Prairie, what impact do you think, long-term impact that is, these sorts of programs have on the level of social cohesion that exists in places like Canada? I suppose after 9/11, 7/7 and all the other newspaper reports that followed as a direct result of it, Muslims have been given a bad deal. We haven't really been treated fairly in certain elements of the media. When you've spoken to non-Muslims, what have they actually said to you about their image and their view of Muslims after seeing programs like yours?
Well, I mean, what they say is that it gives them gives them context, right? It gives them, especially if they have never met a Muslim before, they sort of watch it and sort of, tells them this is a community that has all these other issues and, people, and then that it normalizes them and it humanizes them, and it, these are like fathers and mothers and people sort of, paying bills and raising kids and having jobs and going to work and having the same worries and insecurities as everybody else. And so what they're saying is that this show helped them realize that this is just an ordinary community with the same worries and, how are we going to be able to pay the next bill? What am I going to do if I lose my job? My kid is rebelling. A teenager is driving me nuts. That Muslims have the same worries, and that they're a relatable community, and that it sort of sucks the exoticism out of that world and helped them realize that it was just an ordinary community that happened to be of a different faith, but that these issues also happened in the synagogue and the temple and the church, and that they were, heartened to realize that there wasn't anything, different or peculiar or unusual about this community that they had been led to believe.
And I suppose the fact that your family's origins actually lie in Pakistan also gave you a very diverse set of cultures to look at in all of your work, and you've got that greater understanding there of different cultures and different ways of life. Do you think this has helped you in your media career, which I suppose is a big advantage for a lot of Muslims out there who want to choose the world of media as their future career?
I mean, I think it's always good to have experiences in other communities so you can draw upon those experiences. You know, like, I mean, you know, my husband is Canadian but of Bengali origin, and so my kids have sort of a wide, you know, range of experiences when they go to the mosque and the community, and, you know, different cultures and different languages, and, you know, they're sort of united by the faith in Islam. And so, you know, when I pitched Little Mosque, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't Pakistani-centric, that it represented, like, the universality of the community, and that we picked actors and, you know, from different communities. So we had, you know, Nigerian and Lebanese and Pakistani and Indian, and made sure that the whole, you know, Muslim community was represented, because it wasn't just a Pakistani mosque, right?
Sure,
it was a mosque full of different nationalities, and that was important to me.
Certainly.
Make sure they were all represented.
We really do appreciate your time today, and we certainly hope that you'll come on the radio show again in the future. But just finally, Zarqa Nawaz, what would be your advice out there to our listeners listening to this program right now that want to play a role in society but perhaps are hesitating in doing so because they feel as though the world's biggest barriers will be put in their way because they are Muslim or because they are from a different background?
I don't know. I mean, I've never let that affect me, or I've always told my children never to let that affect them, and that, you know, what they have to do is work hard and do the best they can do and follow their dreams, and then to pray and trust God and just do it, you know, and to stop making excuses. You just have to do it and go forward, and no one's going to do it for you. No one's going to hand it to you on a silver platter. You have to work really hard, and you have to have dreams, and you have to be willing to work hard for those dreams. And it's hard for everyone, not just Muslims. I mean, it's a difficult economy, and you just have to be positive. You know, and you know, that's what God says in the Quran, right? You have to work hard, and then you have to leave it to God, and you have to pray and be patient and be optimistic. And that's, you know, that's a requirement in our faith. And I think if you follow those words, then everything's going to be fine.
Inshallah. Zarqa Nawaz, thank you very much for joining us today on Friday Night Fusion.
Thank you for having me.